It always has been ever since we fished the very first tournament up here.
It's quite a fishery to keep putting out year after year after year like it does.
The amazing thing about the amount of fish that's being caught is a lot of the river is so muddy you can't even really fish it very well, so the people are kind of crowded up, and yet, you know, it's still amazing. I don't know, this is without a doubt one of the very best places that we fish.
There's a lot of fish in this river. The grass is slowly disappearing up and down the waterways, but the fish seem to be adapting and going to other structures.
Everybody catch good fish.
What they're talking about isn't Swamp Gas Corner, where you'd likely see Harry and Charlie putting old Stump Jumper in the water on a Saturday morning. They're talking about the Potomac River just outside Washington, D.C. It's time for the Bassmasters on TNN Outdoors.
Today, the Bassmasters goes to Charles County, Maryland, and the Potomac River for the Bassmaster Tournament Trail's prestigious Maryland Top 100. And what a tournament this is shaping up to be. In fact, this show is going to be so action-packed, we're going to jump right in. Our field reporter, Tim Miller, is on the river now, where the action is already hot. Tim?
Ray, we're up in downtown Washington, D.C., just past the runway of National Airport, and there is Paul Elias right in front of the Washington Monument, and he has a good fish on. He's been fighting it here for several minutes. You know, it's amazing that a river so rich in our national history is also so rich in bass fishing, but this one is. In the 10 years since the Bassmaster Tournament Trail has been coming here on a regular basis, this river has proved some exciting tournament action, and it looks like this year will be no exception.
Dang, go! Don't ever do that again. Why do you do that to me? Come here. You're about to get away. I know I need her. I wish she'd quit doing that. Yes.
But there's one factor this year that could make a big difference in this tournament. As luck would have it, this is one of two events the Bassmaster Tournament Trail scheduled long before Hurricane Fran ever became a gust of wind. As that torrential storm battered the East Coast, it flooded this whole area and put the Potomac at record flood levels. That muddied up the main river channel where a number of anglers normally fish. So, Tim, what are the alternatives?
There are two key areas where you will probably see anglers spending most of their time this week. One is up here in downtown Washington, D.C., where the water clarity is actually pretty good. The other place the water is clear is in the back of the major creeks. But that means anglers will congregate to these areas, and anymore it's tough to win a tournament when those conditions exist. So the key might be the guy who can break away and go find his own spot away from the crowd.
So there you have it. All the early reports indicate the bass fishermen are catching bass despite the muddy water. And you're going to learn how fish move with the tide and how one angler, despite all the difficulties, comes through like a champion reaching for that pot of gold. I'm Ray Scott for the Bassmasters. We'll be back in just a minute.
It's some of the best bass water anywhere. It fishes big. And it runs past the White House. From the Revolutionary War up through the last election, the Potomac River has been there for it all. Flowing from Washington southward to Chesapeake Bay, the Potomac is one of the best stops along the $4 million Bassmaster Tournament Trail. Today, you'll see the nation's top bass anglers tackle this historic river.
Another day, another dollar.
Well, maybe only $1 for you, Roland, but the winner of this Top 100 tournament will take home a total package of $45,000. Here are the conditions going into this first round. Weather won't be a major factor this week. Cool fall temperatures will hold steady in the mid-70s. The biggest variable is the water level. Tides will remain high, and although the water's muddy, it is clearing. Today, you'll see 3 different approaches to the Potomac. Each can be applied to your own fishing, whether you frequent tidal water or not. Condition number 1, jetties. On tidal rivers, the water is almost in constant motion. Only during high and low tides is it slack. Largemouth bass don't like current. and will usually look for places to hide from it. Rock jetties provide an excellent current break. On the Potomac, Jay Yellis automatically goes back to the same spot every year. This hot young Texas angler made his first cast to this pier structure back in 1991.
That one might help
He
a little
captured the Bassmaster Top 100 here in '93, and he's back again this year.
What I'm fishing here is an old man-made jetty or ferry that comes out about 100 yards off the bank, and it's dredged out on the sides to where it drops into 15, 20 feet of water, and up on top, that low tide, it's about 2 feet deep with a bunch of rocks and old wooden pilings. And surrounding this whole area is just a big, gigantic grass bed. And so there's just a lot of fish in this area to begin with. I think at one time it's a man-made jetty, and it had a big dock on it that ships used to tie up to at one time. So I guess years ago when they built it, somebody just brought a bunch of rocks out here and just built this thing. Just piled rock after rock after rock on top of each other and then built a boat dock on top of that.
So why are the bass stacked in here?
The reason the bass are here in great numbers like they often are is because the whole area is just full of shad. You can go down each side of this jetty with your electronics and you'll see just wads of bait fish all up and down it. And it's the same every year. Every year I come here, there's bass on this thing in the fall.
Be a good one now.
And every year I come here, it's just loaded with shad, too. So it's just a natural feeding ground for the bass.
Jay says crankbaits and jigs are best.
Deep diving crankbaits, like a Magnum Wigglewort, a Storm Magnum Wigglewort, or any chartreuse colored deep diving crankbaits. And the other thing is a jig and pig. I usually do well on that, on a Berkeley power jig with a power craw trailer. Black and blue is usually as good a color as any on this.
Bass will change position on the jetty according to the tide. On high tide, bass face downstream, positioned above the jetty and protected from the current. On low tide, bass move to the downstream side. Yellis says that's when fishing is generally best.
I usually catch most of my fish here on the outgoing or the low tide. What's really truly amazing about this spot is the fact that it's probably the biggest community hole I've ever seen anywhere in the United States that I've fished. And I've never seen a place that gets fished as hard as this
too much
does, and yet it still keeps producing bass.
On the first day weigh-in, Jay Yellis checks in with a respectable 5 bass limit.
Look at the scale, people. 17 pounds, 6 ounces. Let's give him a nice hand. That will play any day. Thank you, Jay.
But it's the Kalamazoo kid, Kevin Van Dam, who steals the show. Van Dam's 18 pounds, 13 ounces tops the Jersey's activewear leaderboard. Jay Yellis is third, followed by Denny Brower and Chuck Economou. Less than 3 pounds back is Paul Elias from Mississippi in 7th today. When we come back, you'll see how Paul is fishing a big grass bed and making a big charge.
Don't do that.
But first, it's time for Ray Scott's Casting Kid of the Week.
Here's a good bassing buddy, Ben Ross of West Union, West Virginia. He's our Casting Kid of the Week. Ben's made quite a splash in his flip, pitch, and casting program. This 9-year-old has reached the National Casting Kids Finals 2 years in a row. Ben's been hooked on fishing ever since he was a small fry. And this guy plans to be a big-time pro tournament fisherman in just a few years. He plays basketball and baseball and enjoys hunting, but fishing's his game. A big Bassmaster salute for our friend Ben Ross of West Union, West Virginia, our Bassmaster Casting Kid of the Week.
Kevin Van Dam is leading this Maryland Top 100. He's fishing 2 patterns. Shallow water down the river on high tide, then up to Washington, D.C. during low tide.
Because it pulls a lot of the fish off a lot of this trash and sunken barges and that, and it concentrates them a little more. Today, because of the full moon, we've got an extremely high tide, and it's making the fishing a lot tougher. My shallow water pattern, the wind blew and muddied up the bank so bad that I can't even fish on them or hold on them. So this is my backup up here, and there's a lot of big fish around. It's just a matter of getting them to bite. And I guarantee you there's enough of them swimming on this bank to win with. It's just getting them to bite.
Right here now.
But keep your eye on Paul Elias.
Good girl.
Paul is fishing the second strategy you should always remember. Where there's grass, there's bass.
In years past, we've never been able to get on top of this grass bed. It's just been a solid mat. Now it's died down to where you can maneuver around in it on high to medium tide. And you can catch them. You know, the fish really don't have anywhere else to go. All the grass from the other side of the bridge and everything's gone, and so they've all come and centered right in this one area. I was really surprised that more boats didn't find it.
But the ones who did find it are all catching bass, like Florida pro Carol Hagan. And 95 Classic champion Mark Davis. And Japan's Toshinari Namiki. Along with Paul Elias, all these anglers are slow-rolling spinnerbaits through the grass.
It's a Hank Parker Classic spinnerbait, and it's, you know, I just put willow leaf blades on it, and I'm just reeling it real slow and ticking off the grass. All those good bites are coming when you get hung on the grass, and you just kind of rip it off there real slow, and they kill it right then. I'm using Berkeley Fireline, which has no stretch and have a lot of feel. I can feel that grass. I can feel right when the spinnerbait gets on that grass, and it rips off the grass a lot easier. So I don't tend to hang up in the grass near as much as a lot of the fishermen are that are using regular monofilament. So I think that might also be a key to getting some extra bites. But you know, I think the whole thing is slowly working an area that's producing big fish. There's one section of that grass bed that it seems to be holding bigger fish, and that's a section that 3 or 4 of us are working. Stop it.
And at the second day weigh-in, Paul stands to move up.
Look here, people. Watch what happens. We may have a new leader here. 16 pounds, 10 ounces, mark it and send him to the shower. Paul, that's good.
But the stringer of the day belongs to Dan Moorhead of Paducah, Kentucky.
18 pounds, 14 ounces. Ho! I got to ask you though. You've taken this thing, the biggest string of the tournament. How many bass total did you catch today?
I caught a conservative, probably 5 limits. It was an incredible day. My partner's got a good bag of fish too.
5 limits. That's 25 bass. You can bet the Bassmaster camera crews will be right beside Dan Moorhead tomorrow to find out what he's doing. Even though you haven't seen the name Dan Moorhead on top the leaderboard much, watch out for this young Kentucky pro. Dan's jumped ahead of the pack here on the Potomac and leads Denny Brower and Kevin Van Dam, but by an uncomfortably small margin. With over 25 keepers to his credit yesterday, Dan's onto something different, which is our 3rd lesson on tackling tidal water. Bass change position with the tide. Every 6 hours, the tide raises and lowers the river's water level. So 4 times every day, bass are forced to relocate based on fluctuating water levels.
These fish have been migrating off of a big milfoil grass flat out in front of the creek here out the mouth, and they'll just migrate back in as the tides come in. And they're just cruising. There's several individual grass spoils or just large clumps of milfoil, and they isolate on them and make them a little more easier to catch. You know, it's a good ambush point. And I've just been kind of coming in here and letting them catch what I can, then wait 20 or 30 minutes and a new group of fish will move in. And I try to take advantage of it for the high tide and then the first hour of outgoing tide. And then after that, you just start following the fish back out towards the grass flats. And then on low tide out there, you can get out over the top of the milfoil and throw a little crankbait, and it's been working rather well. So right now it's just kind of a waiting game. I'm trying to catch what I can catch until the tide gets right, and then hopefully I can get the bites I really need to win. There's one.
Dan Moorhead has his first bass on. Dan's fishing a spinnerbait on the high tide back in this backwater area. He's primarily targeting isolated wood cover and grass clumps. This is a small pocket in the very back end of this creek. There's barely enough room for 2 boats back here. Dan's trying to pick off a few fish early from this backwater spot on high tide, but like he said, he's in a waiting game. And what he's waiting for is the low tide, when these bass will stack up on the milfoil bed just outside this pocket. That's a good first fish for Dan on a spinnerbait. He's using a Stanley Vibershaft spinnerbait, but he's made a couple of modifications to the lure.
It's a 3/8 ounce. I've modified the bait completely. I've put a 3.5 fluorescent orange Colorado blade in front of a 4.5 Indiana gold blade. It's a Hildebrandt blade. The muddier water, the vibration seems to trigger the fish or call them out of the grass somewhat. And the fluorescent orange blade, it just seems to trigger a few more strikes.
Dan Moorhead switched to a topwater now. He's still fishing grass clumps and isolated wood cover in this backwater area. This is a good keeper he's caught on a topwater plug. The tide is starting to go out now, and Dan's next move will be out to that milfoil bed where he'll switch lures to a baby 1- crankbait.
It's a really neat bait for throwing in the milfoil. It only dives about a foot deep at the very maximum, and you can take it and burn it real fast, kind of like you would a rattle trap, right over top of that milfoil, and those fish will come up out of it and just annihilate it.
Dan Moorhead has another bass on. Boy, that didn't take long. It's his first fish since he switched out to the milfoil bed here and changed his lure to the baby 1- crankbait. Dan's strategy is to throw the crankbait by these isolated clumps of milfoil, which he's using as targets.
Well, as I'm out here going out over the milfoil patch, I'm looking for spoils or large clumps of milfoil. The water's really clear, so I can see really well. And I'm just throwing that baby 1- past them and burning it, and the fish will come up from behind them, or just, you never know where they're going to come from. It's just annihilate. It's just like throwing a spinnerbait, but it's got a rattle in it and treble hooks, and just seems to work better.
Dan Moorhead is getting a reaction strike on his baby 1- crankbait, and it's working for Dan. Because the water is very clear out here in the milfoil, he's seeing most of his strikes.
Right. Well, I believe that it's a reaction bite. You can fish the bait real fast. It's got a loud rattle, but it won't go deep enough to get hung up in the grass. A spinnerbait in the clear water and the bright sunshine, they just don't seem to want it as well. They will hit a top water, but there again, they just don't seem to take the bait in as well. And this baby 1-, it's a reaction bite. It triggers them. It's one of the most aggressive strikes that you can imagine. What happens is when the tide goes out, it pulls all that water through that milfoil, and it gets crystal clear. I'd say 95% of the time, I'm watching them come out there and eat it. And it's just really a fun way to fish. You're fine, bro.
Dan Moorhead has found a unique area, especially for this week at the Potomac. This creek is loaded with 2 to 4 pound bass. Dan found the right spot, he's been patient and waited for the right time, and the payoff, well, the payoff is in the bag.
Holy smoke, 20 pounds, that's it! Oh, that is fantastic.